If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. It was a crisp early morning on the 5th of November 2024 as Lucas Anderson, an independent auditor and investigative journalist, walked into the local government office in Shalala, a small town where bureaucracy and inefficiency were often the norm. His goal that day was simple but crucial: inspect the Public Records Index to ensure transparency in local government operations. Little did he know, his visit would soon turn into a showdown between his rights as a citizen and the unchecked power of local government officials. Lucas was no stranger to public records audits. As a journalist known for his tenacity in uncovering governmental misdeeds, he had faced resistance before, but nothing like what he would encounter at Shalala City Hall. He had done his research, carefully reviewing local laws and statutes, particularly the state's Public Records Act. His rights were clear, and the records he sought were protected by law. However, what Lucas didn't expect was the oppressive attitude of the city's staff and the shocking abuse of authority that would unfold before him. Upon entering the building, Lucas approached the counter where a young woman, Sabrina, sat, wearing the typical city employee uniform of indifference. Sabrina was a clerk at the city hall, a new employee who, it seemed, had little regard for the legal responsibilities that came with her position. Lucas greeted her politely. "Hi, good morning. I'm here to inspect the Public Records Index," he said, his tone calm but firm. Sabrina looked up from her desk, her eyes briefly scanning him before her lips curled into a condescending smile. "Do you work here, or are you just visiting?" she asked, her tone dripping with an attitude that suggested she wasn't used to being questioned about her authority. "I'm a citizen and an auditor. I'm here to inspect the records index as allowed under the Public Records Act," Lucas explained, emphasizing the legal basis for his request. "Right," Sabrina replied, her voice skeptical. "I'm new here, so I'm not entirely sure how things work, but I'll need to ask you to step outside for a moment while I figure this out. You know, just to be sure." Lucas felt his patience start to wear thin. He had dealt with pushback before, but Sabrina's attempt to force him outside, despite the fact that he was standing in a public office, was not only wrong, it was a blatant violation of his rights. "I'm afraid that's not necessary," Lucas said, standing his ground. "You're asking me to leave a public space for no valid reason. According to state law, I have every right to remain here while I inspect the records." Sabrina's face tightened. "Well, I am still learning the rules here, so if you want to talk to someone higher up, I'll have the police chief come down." Lucas raised an eyebrow at this response. Sabrina had escalated things quickly, and it was clear that she was either completely ignorant of the law or, worse, was trying to use her position to intimidate him. "Fine, call him down," Lucas said, deciding to play along. He wasn't afraid of any officer, but he did want to see how far this could go. "But know that I'm in the right, and if this goes any further, I will hold you and the city accountable." A few minutes later, the police chief, an older man named Officer Danfield, arrived. His imposing presence was meant to intimidate, but Lucas wasn't easily scared. As the officer walked in, he scanned the room and then focused his attention on Lucas, giving him a curt nod. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Danfield asked, his voice stern. Lucas, ever the professional, kept his cool. "I've simply come to inspect the Public Records Index, which I am entitled to do under the law. However, your clerk is insisting that I step outside and has even called for police assistance to prevent me from doing so." Officer Danfield looked at Sabrina, who had now become defensive. "Is that true?" he asked her. Sabrina nodded. "Yes, sir, I'm new, and I wasn't sure what to do when this man started recording and asking about public records. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't doing something illegal." Lucas chuckled dryly. "There's nothing illegal about recording in a public space, especially when I'm on a public records request. Sabrina here might want to brush up on the law." Officer Danfield sighed and looked at Sabrina. "She's right. It's perfectly legal for him to record, especially since he's here doing an official audit. As long as he isn't interfering with the duties of others, there's no reason for you to make him leave." Sabrina's face reddened with embarrassment, but instead of acknowledging her mistake, she crossed her arms and huffed. "Fine," she muttered, still not willing to concede. Lucas didn't let her demeanor distract him. He pressed on. "I would still like to inspect the Public Records Index. Could you please assist me with that?" Sabrina hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Uh, uh, I'm not sure we have one. We've never maintained a central index here, but let me check the records to see if we have one for this department. Lucas could feel the wheels turning in her mind, and it was clear she was trying to come up with an excuse. Sabrina had already made a grave error by acting as though the law didn't apply to her, but it was the city's inability to comply with simple regulations that would prove the most damning. According to state law, Lucas began, your office, like all public offices, is required to maintain a public records index. This is not optional, and it certainly shouldn't be left up to personal discretion. I expect to see that index now, or I will take legal action. Sabrina's eyes widened and she looked at Officer Danfield for guidance. The police chief, still holding his professional composure, gave her a small nod, signaling that Lucas was in the right. After a few tense moments, Sabrina reluctantly left the room to check the records, leaving Lucas and Officer Danfield alone. Lucas knew the officer was probably trying to figure out what to do next. He had seen enough to know that police officers often misuse their authority, especially when they felt threatened by someone who knew their rights. You know, Lucas said, breaking the silence, this whole situation could have been avoided if the staff here had just known the law. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just doing my job. Officer Danfield nodded thoughtfully. I get that. And to be honest, I think Sabrina could have handled this a lot better. She's new, but she should have known better than to escalate it like this. Just as they finished their conversation, Sabrina returned, clearly flustered. Well, she said, I checked the records, and it seems like we don't have an index after all. At least not one that's been officially maintained. Lucas smiled, knowing that this was the moment of truth. So you're admitting that you don't have the required public records index? He asked, his tone both surprised and incredulous. Sabrina swallowed hard. Yes, she admitted, her voice small. But we've never had one. It's just not something we've done. Lucas didn't mince words. That's a serious violation of state law. You've failed to maintain basic transparency, and now I'll be reporting this to the proper authorities. He turned to Officer Danfield, who looked at him with a mix of sympathy and regret. I'm sorry, but there's not much I can do about this. You're right. They've messed up, and it's going to cost them. Lucas knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger issue. The small city of Shalala had just been exposed for its incompetence and disregard for the law. But Lucas was ready to take on this fight, no matter where it led. Lucas knew that this was far from over. The initial confrontation at Shalala City Hall had been only the beginning of a much larger investigation. The city's refusal to comply with the Public Records Act was a serious violation, and the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. This wasn't just about a simple mistake or oversight. It was a deliberate failure by the city's government to provide transparency and access to the public records that were rightfully theirs. As Lucas walked out of the city hall, he could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He was no longer just an auditor. He was an advocate for the people of Shalala who were being denied their basic rights. He had to expose the truth no matter how ugly it was and no matter how powerful the people behind this corruption were. The first thing Lucas did after leaving the city hall was to contact his editor, Samantha, who had been following his progress throughout the day. She had always been supportive of his work, and she knew how to handle high-profile cases like this. When she picked up the phone, Lucas didn't waste any time. Samantha, you won't believe this, Lucas began, his voice tense with frustration. Shalala City Hall has no public records index, and they're refusing to comply with state law. I've got all the proof we need to take them down. Samantha's voice was calm, but there was an underlying sense of urgency. I'm glad you're on top of it, Lucas, but we need to be careful. You know how these things can blow up. If you push too hard, the city could retaliate. We need to make sure we have everything lined up before we go public. I know, Lucas replied, but this isn't just about a missing index. This is about a complete failure of their system. They can't just sweep this under the rug. Samantha paused for a moment, clearly processing what Lucas had just said. All right, I'll send you some legal contacts who can help you with this. In the meantime, I want you to get as much evidence as possible. If we're going to take this to the next level, we need the full story. Lucas agreed, and after hanging up, he sat down in his car and began planning his next move. He knew that Sabrina and the police chief weren't the only ones involved in this mess. There were other city employees, council members, and perhaps even higher-ups who were complicit in covering up the city's blatant disregard for the law. If he could gather enough evidence, he might be able to not only expose the truth, but also bring justice to those responsible. The next day, Lucas returned to Shalala City Hall. This time, he had a different approach in mind. Instead of confronting Sabrina directly, he decided to dig deeper into the city's records system. He knew that the lack of a central public records index was just the tip of the iceberg. There had to be more to uncover. Lucas made his way to the back office where the city's records were supposedly stored. As he walked through the dimly lit hallway, he could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He knew that the moment he started asking questions, the people in charge would start to panic. And that was exactly what he wanted. He approached a different clerk this time, an older woman named Gloria, who appeared to be in charge of organizing the city's records. Gloria was much more experienced than Sabrina, but there was something in her eyes that told Lucas she knew more than she was letting on. "Good morning, Gloria," Lucas said, his voice friendly but determined. "I was hoping I could take a look at the records index for your department. I'm conducting an audit, and I need to ensure that everything is in order." Gloria glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond right away, instead giving him a long, scrutinizing look. "Is something wrong?" Lucas asked, sensing that something was off. Gloria hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You know, that's not something we usually just hand out to the public. The index, I mean, it's complicated." "I understand," Lucas replied, keeping his tone steady. "But as a public servant, you are required by law to provide access to public records. This includes the index. I've already spoken with Sabrina about it, and she's confirmed that the city doesn't maintain a central index, but that doesn't mean individual departments aren't required to keep their own." Gloria's face went pale as she heard this. It was clear that Lucas was starting to uncover something that had been kept under wraps for far too long. "That's not exactly how it works," Gloria said, her voice faltering. "There's no need to make this into a big deal." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me that you don't have a public records index for your department? That's a violation of state law, Gloria, and I have the legal documents to prove it." The older woman's eyes darted nervously around the room, as if looking for an escape. "Listen, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but I'm just following orders. I don't have the authority to make decisions about this." "Then who does?" Lucas pressed, his voice now more assertive. "Who in this city has the authority to ensure that public records are accessible to the people?" Gloria was clearly flustered now. She looked around the office before leaning in closer to Lucas, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "The city manager. He's the one who makes the decisions about records. But you didn't hear that from me." Lucas felt a surge of excitement. He was getting closer to the heart of the problem. "Thank you, Gloria. I'll be sure to speak with the city manager about this. I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about why the city isn't following state law." As he turned to leave, Gloria called after him, her voice shaky. "Just be careful, okay? There's more going on here than you know." Lucas paused at the door, intrigued. "What do you mean?" But Gloria had already retreated into her office, her back turned to him. Lucas knew that she was hiding something bigger than just a missing records index, and he was determined to find out what it was. Lucas knew that the city manager was the key to uncovering the full extent of the corruption within Shalala. If Gloria's cryptic warning had any weight, the manager was involved in a deeper conspiracy than just a missing records index. The missing index was merely the symptom of a much larger disease, a breakdown of the system meant to serve the people. With this new information, Lucas wasted no time in setting up a meeting with the city manager, who, according to Gloria, had the power to control how records were handled. He made a call to the manager's office, trying his best to remain polite but firm. The receptionist, a woman with an annoyingly chipper voice, answered. "Good afternoon, Shalala City Hall. How may I help you?" "Hi, my name is Lucas Caldwell, and I'm conducting an audit regarding public records compliance. I would like to speak with the city manager regarding some concerns I have," Lucas replied. After a brief pause, the receptionist responded, her tone slightly less enthusiastic. Hold, please. A moment later, the city manager himself, Richard Collins, came on the line. Mr. Caldwell, I understand you are looking for information about our public records procedures. I'm happy to help. What can I do for you? I believe there are significant issues with the way the city is handling public records, and I need to speak with you in person to resolve these concerns, Lucas said. He was trying to maintain a neutral tone, but the frustration was creeping in. It's about the records index, or lack thereof, and I've been told you have more control over these matters than other departments. There was a long pause on the line, and then Collins spoke again, his voice much colder than before. Come down to my office tomorrow morning, Mr. Caldwell. We'll discuss this in person. I'm not sure what you're insinuating, but I will make sure we clear this up. Thank you. I'll be there at 10 a.m. sharp, Lucas said, not allowing any trace of doubt to show in his voice. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. He could already tell that Collins was trying to shut him down before he even got the chance to ask his questions. The following morning, Lucas arrived early at City Hall, ready for the confrontation. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As he walked through the familiar halls of Shalala City Hall, he could feel the tension in the air. The city's employees seemed to be on edge, avoiding eye contact and keeping to their tasks. Lucas couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. He made his way to the city manager's office, where he was greeted by a tall, middle-aged man in a gray suit. The receptionist who had greeted him the day before gave him a small nod and gestured toward the door to Collins' office. Mr. Caldwell, the city manager is expecting you, she said, her voice much colder now. Lucas pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was sleek and modern, with large windows that offered a view of the city's downtown. Collins sat behind a large desk, his fingers steepled in front of him as he stared at the stack of papers. He didn't bother to stand or greet Lucas. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for coming, Collins said, his voice neutral. What can I do for you today? I'll get straight to the point, Lucas said, his voice steady but forceful. I've been conducting an audit on the public records in Shalala, and I've discovered that your city doesn't maintain a records index, which is a violation of state law. Collins' eyes narrowed slightly, but his posture remained unchanged. I'm aware of the concerns surrounding the records index, but I assure you, Mr. Caldwell, that there are valid reasons why it hasn't been updated. We're working on streamlining our processes, and some of the records you're asking for are available online. We've tried to modernize the system. That's not good enough, Lucas shot back. State law requires that the index be available for public inspection, regardless of whether the records are available online. The law is clear, and you are not above it. Collins' eyes flickered with something like irritation, but he quickly masked it with a calm expression. I understand your position, Mr. Caldwell, but you have to consider the practical side of things. We have limited resources here, and maintaining an index just isn't feasible at the moment. You're missing the point, Lucas pressed. This isn't about your resources. This is about your duty to uphold the law. If you're deliberately failing to maintain these records, that's a serious issue. It's not just an oversight. It's a violation of the public trust. For the first time during the meeting, Collins leaned forward in his chair, his tone turning more hostile. I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Caldwell. You're accusing me and my office of something that's simply not true. We've been doing our best with the limited budget we have. Lucas held his ground, refusing to back down. I'm not here to argue with you about budgets, Mr. Collins. I'm here to ensure that the city is complying with the law. And I've seen enough to know that this is more than just an oversight. I've been told by your employees that you've been involved in more than just this records issue. There's a pattern here, isn't there? The city manager's eyes darkened, and Lucas could see the veins in his neck tightening. I don't know what you think you're implying, but I suggest you tread carefully, Mr. Caldwell. You don't want to make an enemy of the city administration. Lucas remained unfazed. If you think I'm going to be intimidated, you're sadly mistaken, Mr. Collins. The truth is bigger than your threats. The people of Shalala deserve better than this. Collins leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of forced calm. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he muttered under his breath. Lucas didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, and I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too. After the meeting with Collins, Lucas felt a sense of both dread and determination settle over him. It was clear now that the corruption in Shalala ran deeper than he had originally thought. Collins wasn't just a city manager trying to make ends meet with a limited budget. He was part of a much bigger problem, one that went beyond a missing records index. Lucas knew that he couldn't let this go. He needed more evidence, more people to speak up. But he also realized that the more he pushed, the more dangerous things would get. There were powerful people in Shalala who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and they wouldn't hesitate to target him if they thought he was a threat. But Lucas couldn't back down now. The people of Shalala deserved transparency, and he was going to fight for it, no matter what. As he walked out of the city hall that day, Lucas made a decision. He was going to take this fight to the public, expose the corruption for all to see, and he was going to make sure the city knew that no matter how powerful they thought they were, they couldn't escape accountability. The battle had only just begun. Lucas didn't waste any time after his confrontation with the city manager. He spent the next few days digging deeper into Shalala's records, uncovering inconsistencies in the public documents, and learning more about the city's questionable practices. But Lucas knew that merely collecting evidence wouldn't be enough. He needed to expose the truth to the public. He needed the city to feel the weight of its corruption. By the end of the week, Lucas had enough to make his case. He compiled all the documentation he had gathered, including emails from city employees confirming that the Public Records Index had been intentionally withheld, and a series of internal memos suggesting that the city's leadership was fully aware of the issue. The more he uncovered, the more it became clear. Shalala wasn't just failing its citizens. It was actively obstructing transparency and breaking the law. Lucas knew that the media would be his best ally in this fight. He contacted Sarah Thompson, a reporter from the local news station, who had a reputation for uncovering the truth in even the most difficult situations. He had met Sarah during a few of his past audits, and they had a mutual respect for each other's work. Sarah was skeptical at first. "I know you've been looking into this for a while, Lucas, but are you sure this is the right move? Exposing the city like this could cause a lot of backlash, not just from the officials, but also from the public. Shalala's a small town. People here don't take kindly to outsiders stirring up trouble." Lucas was already prepared for her concerns. "I've got the evidence, Sarah, and it's not just about the records indexes anymore. It's about the city's total disregard for its obligations to the public. They're breaking the law, and no one is doing anything about it. Someone has to stand up." Sarah hesitated, but then agreed. "All right, let's do it. I'll help you get the story out." The day Sarah aired the segment on Shalala's records scandal, the city was thrown into chaos. People who had lived in Shalala for decades were shocked by the corruption that had been quietly festering in their local government. The news segment revealed not only the missing records index, but also the city's failure to follow basic public records laws, the manipulation of documents, and the cover-up attempts by city officials. As expected, the city manager, Richard Collins, was furious. He immediately issued a statement to the press, attempting to downplay the severity of the situation and blaming a miscommunication for the missing records index. He even tried to imply that Lucas and Sarah had taken the issue out of context, but the damage had already been done. Public outrage quickly spread across Shalala, with citizens demanding answers. Protests began outside City Hall, with people holding signs that read, "Shalala deserves transparency and end corruption now." It wasn't long before the state attorney's office took notice of the growing public outcry. Lucas knew that once the public became aware of the issue, there was no turning back. The state attorney's office had no choice but to investigate Shalala's handling of public records, and that meant the city officials were in trouble. But he also knew that the city would try to fight back with everything it had. Richard Collins had already proven himself willing to lie and manipulate the situation, and now, with the public spotlight on him, he was bound to escalate his efforts to protect himself. It didn't take long for the city to retaliate. Late one evening, Lucas received an anonymous tip from someone inside City Hall, someone who had been watching the unfolding drama and knew what was coming. The tipster told Lucas that the city was preparing to file charges against him, claiming that his audit had been illegal and that he had overstepped his bounds by accessing certain documents without proper authorization. Lucas was not surprised. He had expected this kind of response, but it only made him more determined to continue the fight. He contacted Sarah and informed her of the latest developments. Together, they prepared for what was about to unfold. The legal battle would be tough, but Lucas knew he had the truth on his side, and that was all that mattered. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with reporters, local citizens, and even a few curious tourists who had heard about the case through the media. Lucas sat at the front of the room, flanked by his legal team. Across from him, Richard Collins sat with his own high-powered attorney, a slick, well-dressed man who had made a name for himself defending corrupt politicians and businesses. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Marlowe, took her seat on the bench. She had been known for being tough but fair, and Lucas hoped that she would be impartial in her handling of the case. The prosecutor, a young woman named Lisa Park, stood up first. She was determined to make sure Shalala's government was held accountable for its actions. Your Honor, the case before you is not just about a missing records index. This is about a pattern of deception, obstruction, and neglect by the very people who are supposed to serve the public. The city of Shalala has failed to uphold its legal obligations, and it has actively concealed information from the citizens it serves. Collins' attorney, however, wasted no time in launching his defense. Your Honor, what we have here is a misunderstanding. The city was simply trying to improve efficiency, and the so-called missing records index was an oversight. There was no malicious intent involved. Mr. Caldwell, the defendant in this case, has taken a single issue and blown it out of proportion. Lucas was ready for the counterattack. He stood up, his voice unwavering as he addressed the court. Your Honor, this is not about an oversight. This is about a deliberate attempt to prevent the citizens of Shalala from accessing public records. The city manager and his office have known about the missing index for years, and they have made no effort to correct it. They have used taxpayer money to cover up their failures, and it is time for them to answer for their actions. The courtroom grew tense. Collins' face had gone pale as Lucas spoke, and it was clear that the truth was beginning to sink in. Judge Marlowe leaned forward, her gavel poised. I've heard enough. I will take this under advisement and issue my ruling in the coming days. As the hearing adjourned, the media swarmed around Lucas and Sarah, asking questions. The courtroom had become a battleground, and the momentum was on their side. The city could no longer hide behind its lies. A week later, the ruling came down. Judge Marlowe issued a scathing judgment against Shalala's city government, ordering the city to release all public records and comply with state laws regarding transparency. She also ordered an independent investigation into the city's practices, specifically targeting Richard Collins and his office. The victory was bittersweet. Lucas knew that the fight was far from over. The city would appeal the decision, and the legal battle would continue for months, perhaps years. But for the moment, justice had been served. The city of Shalala would never be the same again. The citizens who had once been complacent had found their voice, and Lucas Caldwell had given them the courage to demand the transparency they deserved. And as for Lucas, he had learned that no matter how deep the corruption ran, no matter how powerful the opposition seemed, the truth had a way of coming to light, if you were willing to fight for it. As the dust settled, Shalala began to change. The city's once hidden flaws were no longer obscured by the smokescreen of bureaucracy. Lucas Caldwell had exposed the corruption, but the real work had just begun. The community, shaken but empowered, found its voice again, and it was clear that no one in city government would be able to operate behind closed doors without facing consequences. With the judge's ruling forcing the city to release its records and comply with the law, a new era of accountability was born. Though the legal battles would continue, Lucas knew that the fight had sparked a fire within the community. Citizens were now more vigilant and determined to ensure their rights were respected. For Lucas, the journey was far from over. His reputation as a relentless auditor grew, and soon other cities began reaching out for his expertise. But for now, he took a moment to reflect on the victory. He had exposed the flaws of a corrupt system, but more importantly, he had shown that even one determined individual could stand up to injustice and make a difference. As the case closed and Shalala began the long process of rebuilding its integrity, Lucas walked away knowing that the fight for transparency was far from over. But he had proven a crucial point. No one, not even those in power, was beyond the reach of accountability. And in the quiet aftermath, the people of Shalala slowly began to rebuild trust in their government. Trust that had been fractured, but at least now was finally being restored. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.